She walked past a burning car, but her 7-year-old turned and whispered, "Mom, something's crying." It was just another winter morning in Fairpine. Emily Quinn, 7 years old, skipped alongside her mother down the snow-dusted sidewalk. The scent of cinnamon buns still clung to her mittens, and her red scarf fluttered behind like a ribbon of fire against the pale white sky. She talked to icicles as if they were old friends, gave names to squirrels, and believed that snowflakes had memories. But as they passed the abandoned lot, a graveyard of rust and silence, Emily paused. Her boots crunched to a stop. Her breath caught. "Mom," she said, voice trembling, "something's crying." Her mother gave a quick glance at the wrecked car smothered in frost. "Just an old junker, honey." But Emily didn't move, because what she heard wasn't just a sound. It was a whimper buried in smoke, a voice not meant for human ears, but understood by a child who saw the world with her heart. What happened next would ignite a movement, unravel a government cover-up, and remind the world that even in silence, loyalty screams the loudest. The cold had a voice in Wren Hollow. It didn't scream, didn't howl like in cities where wind bounced off buildings. No, here it whispered, through the tall pine trees, across snow-laden rooftops, and into the forgotten edges of town. It slipped through cracks and beneath doors, curled around ankles like smoke, and settled heavy in the lungs. It was a silence that pressed against your chest, a hush that made you listen harder, even when there was nothing to hear. That morning, before the sun had the strength to rise, the town lay still under 6 new inches of snow. The only signs of movement were from crows huddling in bare branches and icicles dripping faintly onto cracked sidewalks. Street lamps flickered dimly in the distance. Most homes had already gone back to sleep. Just past the edge of town, beyond the last plowed street, sat an abandoned gravel lot choked with frost-bitten weeds and rusted-out machinery. Old tires buried beneath snow. A collapsed chain-link fence sagged in defeat. And there, parked between 2 forgotten snowplows, was a police cruiser no one had driven in years. Its paint flaked, its decals faded, its windows laced with ice veins. It should have been invisible, but that morning something about it was not. From beneath the hood, faint threads of smoke began to rise, gray on white, like breath on a mirror. Then, a flicker, orange and hungry. Something had ignited deep in the engine block, maybe faulty wiring, maybe something more sinister. Within minutes, flames licked the edges of the windshield. They grew in silence, no dramatic explosion, no Hollywood crescendo, just a soldier. Muscle, discipline, instinct honed by years in service. Badge-Honda Plaid K-47. A dog who never backed down from gunfire, who leapt into danger before the humans around him could think. But now, he was a shadow of that. Curled tightly on the backseat floor, fur clumped with dried blood and soot. Breath shallow and ragged. Smoke filled the cab. His nose twitched weakly. One eye, the left, was swollen shut. The other, barely open, fogged and unfocused. His paw scraped softly against the door, not barking, not crying, just asking. Asking for someone to notice. But no one did. No one saw the soft thud of his body against the seat. No one heard the muffled exhale as his lungs struggled for clean air. The town was asleep, its streets empty, its people warm in their beds. The fire cracked louder now, devouring rubber and dashboard, creeping toward the back where the canine cage kept Juno boxed in. His chest heaved once, twice. then stilled. A gust of wind tore across the lot, scattering ash into the air. The cruiser was beginning to glow from inside like a lantern half buried in snow. And still, not a single soul stirred. Wren Hollow had forgotten Juno, buried him under paperwork and bad decisions, under silence. But the snow doesn't lie, and it doesn't forget. It records everything in layers, like history waiting to be read. And if someone had walked past just then, if someone had looked closely, they might have seen it. A faint paw print smeared against the inside of the frosted window. A last attempt. In that moment, the world stood still. The fire flared against the morning blue. The cruiser hissed in protest. And inside, a hero was dying in the kind of silence that doesn't echo, only settles. But fate, as it tends to, was not finished. Miles away, a bakery bell jingled. A child's laugh rang out over snowfall. And a little girl in a red coat was about to take a path she had never taken before. And because of that, the story was not over. Not yet. Before the smoke, before the cage, before the silence, there was Juno, tail high, breath steady, eyes scanning with a focus that made grown men pause mid-sentence. K9 Unit K47. Not just a number, but a name etched into a ward everyone remembered most. The hostage standoff at Burnell Elementary. Gunmen, 4 children, 1 teacher. No visibility. Officers frozen outside the classroom door, unsure what lay behind. Then Juno, without command, nudged the latch with his snout, slipped inside like a shadow, and within seconds, chaos, screams, a single shot, and then silence. When the team entered, the man with the weapon was face down, arm mauled, gun kicked across the floor. No one else had a scratch. Juno stood between the children and the gunman, chest rising fast, teeth bared, blood on his muzzle. He never let them pass. That earned him a medal, a framed commendation, a photo with the mayor. They gave him peanut butter treats and a steak that night, called him a hero, called him family. And maybe they believed it. Until the night everything changed. 3 months ago, a snowy alley behind a rundown bar on the east end of town. A sting operation, last-minute intel, high risk. Officers in plain clothes, weapons drawn. The air sharp with tension and exhaust. Juno and Officer Travis Hale were in position. Juno could read Hale better than Hale could read himself. Every twitch, every breath, they had worked together for 4 years, trusted like brothers. At 2:41 a.m., the suspect appeared, black hoodie, right hand hidden. A shout, "Show me your hands!" Movement, confusion, a scream, but not from the suspect. From a child, a little girl, no more than 5. Wrong place, wrong time. She had wandered into the alley from the back of the apartment building next door, barefoot in a nightgown, her voice high and terrified. And in that instant, she was directly in the line of fire. Hale shouted for Juno to hold, to pursue the fleeing suspect. Juno didn't. He turned, ran toward the scream, leapt over debris, reached the girl just as a shot rang out. Not from the suspect, from an officer who slipped and misfired into the alley wall. The girl collapsed into Juno's side, sobbing. He curled around her, tail against the snow, ears up, shielding her with every inch of his body. By the time backup arrived, the suspect was gone. The sting had failed. The girl was unharmed, but headlines wouldn't care, and neither did the department. They called it disobedience, not heroism. There was no stake that night, no framed photo, no handshake from the mayor. Just paperwork, cold stares, a memo that used words like unpredictable, liability, non-compliant. Words Juno would never understand, but Hale did, and he signed it. The department Hale through the rear grate, head tilted, ears low, waiting for a command that never came. He waited 3 days. Then someone decided it would be simpler, cleaner to make him disappear. The truth had no uniform, no oath, no badge. It was easier to silence than explain. That's how Juno ended up in the back seat of a rusting cruiser on the outskirts of Wren Hollow. No handler, no food, no blanket. His name erased from the shift logs like he'd never existed. As if the years of service, the children saved, the gunmen stopped, had all been someone else's dream. But even in that metal box, lungs filling with smoke, paws burned from clawing the window, Juno remembered. He remembered the sting of snow underfoot, the beat of boots beside him, the taste of adrenaline and justice, the voice of Hale shouting, "Good boy, bring it in!" He remembered the little girl clutching his fur, whispering, "Thank you, doggy," like it was a prayer. He remembered everything. And somehow, as the frost on the inside of the windows began to melt from the heat, as the air turned into fire, that memory was the only thing that made him lift his head one more time. It wasn't enough to save him, but it was enough to remind the world who he was. They didn't wear uniforms that night, just thick jackets and faces turned away from each other. No badges, no cameras, no words. It was just past 2 a.m. when the side gate creaked open behind the department's maintenance garage, where outdated cruisers and confiscated bikes waited for auction or disposal. The moon hung low, heavy with haze. Snow came down in slow spirals, muffling sound and softening guilt. Lights were out. Paperwork had already been signed off as completed, even if no one could say what exactly had been completed. No one wanted to be there. Not the younger officer gripping the leash too tight. Not the sergeant keeping watch near the fence line. And certainly not Juno, who stood with the quiet resignation of someone who had stopped expecting rescue. They'd taken his tags the night before, taken his badge, his vest. Even his name on the kennel had been scratched out in marker, black lines where letters used to live. All that was left was a silent dog, standing in the middle of a concrete floor that still smelled faintly of bleach and copper. His eyes, one bruised, one open, didn't move, just watched. The officer fumbled with the keys, glancing once at the sergeant. "This doesn't feel right." The sergeant didn't look up, just said flatly, "It's not supposed to." Then the gate clanked again, and it was time. The cruiser had been backed in earlier that evening. No plates, no log sheet. Hero from freedom. Juno walked on his own, no dragging, no growling. His gait was slower now, favoring one leg, but there was no fight in him, just something heavy, like dignity, eroded by routine. When the leash was unclipped and the door swung open, he hesitated, not because he feared what was inside, but because for a brief moment his head turned toward the street, toward the station he used to call home. As if somewhere in his memory he was still listening for his handler's voice. There was none. The officer cleared his throat. "Should we say something?" The sergeant pulled the door shut. It thudded louder than expected. "We don't speak eulogies over inventory," he muttered. And with that they turned, walked back into the dark, snow swallowing their footprints behind them. Inside the cruiser, the cold settled quickly. Juno circled once, then lay down, spine pressed to steel. His breathing was slow but steady. The moonlight barely touched the windows now. Frost had begun to creep across the glass like spider webs of ice, sealing him in. Outside, the lot sat empty. The fence flapped gently in the wind. At 3:17 a.m., no one saw the flicker, a pulse of heat under the hood, then a click, a short spark. Some say it was faulty wiring, others that it was something poured beneath the engine earlier, something less accidental. The truth would vanish like breath in the cold. But fire doesn't need permission. It simply needs time. First, the smell, acrid and sharp, plastic melting into rubber, then the orange bloom that lit the snow like false sunrise. The flames spread slow at first, curling under the dash, biting at the steering column. But heat builds fast in closed spaces. Glass fogged. Metal groaned. In the back, Juno stirred. Smoke slithered through the gaps in the partition. It wasn't the smell that woke him, it was the heat. It crawled along the floor beneath him, licking at his paws like something alive. He lifted his head, his lungs spasmed. His body tried to rise but failed, sliding against the door. He let out one sound, not a bark, not a cry, just a low, fractured whimper. Outside, no one heard. The town was asleep. If someone had been watching from the road, they might have seen the fire spread, how it glowed blue through the ice on the windows, how the roofline of the car pulsed like a heartbeat. But there were no cars passing, no joggers, no curious dog walkers. Just flame and snow and silence. Juno pressed against the cage divider. He couldn't stand any more. His coat was slick with sweat and soot, his ribs trembled. He didn't know what this was, not exactly, but he knew what it felt like to be left behind. And even now, above a bakery door would soon jingle. A girl in a red coat would tug at her mittens and chase a snowflake down the sidewalk. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to walk past a ghost in flames and change everything. But for now the wind howled through pine trees. The fire cracked louder, and a dog named Juno, once a hero, lay alone in the dark, still waiting for a command that would never come. The snow in Wren Hollow didn't fall. It settled. It came down like breath, slow and certain, covering everything in silence. Sidewalks disappeared beneath it, rooftops turned into soft edges. Trees stood still, their limbs outlined in frost, like old black and white photographs. It was the kind of morning where the world felt paused, holding its breath between heartbeats. And through that hush came the small, steady crunch of boots. Amelie Quinn was 7 years old, and always a little behind when she walked, because she never went straight. She zigzagged. She twirled when the wind spun her scarf just right. She stooped down to talk to icicles like they were listening. She hummed to frozen squirrels and waved at mailboxes as if they might wave back. Her red wool coat was 2 sizes too big, handed down from a cousin who had outgrown Christmas-colored things. The sleeves swallowed her wrists, and the belt tied awkwardly in front kept slipping loose. But she liked it, said it made her feel like a storybook girl, the kind that wandered into forests and talked to snow. Her mother walked a few steps ahead, arms full with a paper bag of still warm bread from Myrtle's bakery. She called over her shoulder, "Stay close, baby. Roads are slick." Amelie didn't answer. She was whispering to a row of icicles hanging from a street lamp. "I'll name you Theo," she said to the longest one. "And you," she told the stubby one with the crooked tip, "you're definitely a Bernard." Her mother sighed, adjusting the bag. "If you fall behind again, we're skipping the cider next time." But Amélie was already moving again, hopping from footprint to footprint in the snow like stepping stones. Her scarf trailed behind her, a flash of red in a world gone white. Her mittens, once white themselves, were stained faintly pink from juice boxes and sidewalk chalk, and being 7 years old. Everything about her was wide open. Her eyes, her heart, the way she looked at the world like it was still new. They walked the long way home, partly because the snow was too pretty to rush through, partly because her mother liked the quiet. Most of the town had shut their doors early, content to let the storm pass with cocoa and blankets. Only a few cars crept along the road, tires whispering over slush. Amélie didn't mind the cold. She liked the way it made her breath puff out like dragon smoke. Liked the every afternoon, now empty, dusted in white. Everything looked softer in snow, even the sad parts. "Why don't birds breathe?" Amélie asked suddenly, skipping beside her mom. "Birds, their feet touch the snow, but they don't wear boots," her mom chuckled. "Because they're tougher than we are, I guess." Amélie frowned. "But they're so little." "Doesn't mean they're not strong." She turned that over in her head for a while. She did that often. Took a sentence and held it up like a snow globe, turning it one way, then the other, seeing what shook loose. She paused again, near the chain-link fence that marked the edge of an abandoned lot. The snow was thicker here, undisturbed. The kind of place that looked forgotten, even when it wasn't winter. Her mom kept walking. Amélie didn't. Something pulled at her attention, not loud, not urgent, just off. The wind shifted, carried with it a scent that didn't belong, burnt, like wood smoke, but wrong. She tilted her head. Her breath caught. A tingle moved up her spine, the way it sometimes did when she sensed someone watching. "Mom?" Her voice was small, unsure. Her mom stopped ahead, glanced back. "What, sweetie?" But Amélie didn't answer. She was staring now, past the fence, toward a parked vehicle half covered in snow. Something about the angle, the way the light bent off the windows. Or maybe it was something else entirely. The icicle she'd named earlier suddenly felt silly. She took a step forward, boots crunching into the drift. "Amélie, come on," her mother said, not turning around again. But the girl's eyes stayed fixed on that lot. It was just a car, just metal and snow and rust and silence. But somewhere, deep in her chest, something moved. Like a string being pulled gently. She didn't know that her heart was already changing direction. Didn't know that fate was folding its map differently. Didn't know that someone was waiting on the other side of that glass. Not yet, but the air felt heavier here, and the snow seemed to hold its breath. The wind shifted again, just slightly, just enough. It carried with it the smell Amélie couldn't name. Not quite smoke, not quite burning wood. It was sharper than that. Oil, maybe. Melted plastic. A scent that didn't belong in a snow-covered town, still wrapped in the quiet of morning. Her steps slowed as she reached the edge of the lot. The fence, half buried under snow, creaked faintly in the breeze. Beyond it, under layers of powder and time, sat the rusted cruiser. Faded letters, once spelling police, were still faintly visible on the driver's side door, now flaked and peeled. It looked like of her mother's boots ahead. Her mom didn't stop. Amélie's gaze didn't move. That flicker again, more distinct this time. A soft pulse of movement behind the haze of ice and soot. It wasn't a reflection, wasn't the sun. It was inside the car, And then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the wind. Not metal groaning, not the snap of ice from tree limbs. It was something else. A whimper, barely audible, like it was being dragged through smoke and desperation. Muffled and raw. The sound didn't rise like a siren or crack like a branch. It ached, like someone trying to speak underwater, or something trying to survive the moment it knew it shouldn't. Amelie's breath fogged against the cold. She took a step closer. "Mom?" she called again, louder. This time her mother stopped, annoyed. "What is it now, honey?" Amelie didn't answer right away. Her mittened hand gripped the cold metal of the fence, her eyes locked on the cruiser. "There's something in there," she said softly. Her mother followed her gaze, then exhaled in frustration. "That's just a junk car. Probably been there for years. Come on, Amy, it's freezing." But Amelie didn't move. The whimper came again, this time sharper, shakier. She could hear the edges of it now, frayed like something broken, trying to hold itself together. "Please," Amelie whispered, not to her mom, to whatever was inside. Her mother took a step back toward her, readjusting the bakery bag. "Look, sweetie, it's dangerous. We're not going near that thing. It could be collapsing, or leaking gas, or—" She paused, noticing the look on Amelie's face. Her daughter wasn't just being curious. She was listening, deeply, intently, like she knew something was wrong, like the sound was crawling beneath her skin. "I heard it," Amelie said, her voice trembling. "Something's crying in there." The words didn't make sense to an adult ear, but she meant every syllable. Her mom shifted uncomfortably. "It's probably just the wind, baby. Snow makes weird echoes, that's all. Let's get home before your fingers freeze off." She turned away. Amelie didn't. The sound was clearer now, still distant, still buried, but no longer deniable. A low, labored panting, a scratch. Then another, like someone inside was using the last of their strength to tap against the glass, not to escape, but to say, "I'm still here." Her heart raced. Her legs felt like stone, but she couldn't walk away. "Mom, forgive yourself." And then she saw it, not the flicker, not the whimper. A shape, just barely visible through the fogged rear window. A shadow slumped low across the back seat, not moving, not entirely still. And then a single paw slid forward, leaving a streak in the condensation on the glass. Her breath hitched. She stepped back from the fence, boots crunching in the snow. Then she did what only a child like Amelie would do in a moment like that. She let go of the world that made sense. And she ran. She ran. Didn't think, didn't shout, just bolted through knee-deep snow, her red scarf whipping behind her like a comet's tail. "Amelie!" her mother screamed, voice cracking with fear. But the girl didn't stop. Something deeper than reason had taken over, something ancient, buried in her chest like instinct passed down in whispers. That sound, that cry, it wasn't just noise. It was a call, a plea only someone still soft enough to feel it could hear. She pushed through the half-collapsed fence, arms scraping against metal links, snow biting her shins. The cold hit her full in the face, but she didn't blink. Her breath came out in clouds, fast and frantic. The cruiser loomed ahead, windows now glowing faintly orange. She hadn't realized how bad the fire was until she was close enough to feel it. The heat rolled off the hood like invisible waves, Smoke curled from beneath the wheel wells, thick and black. The glass on the rear window was cracked now, lines spidering out like veins. Behind it, she could barely make out the form slumped inside, still. Silent. Too still. She slammed her hand against the glass. "Hey! Hey!" No response. She dropped to her knees and grabbed the door handle. It didn't budge. Locked. Of course it was locked. "Amelie, get back!" her mother cried from the street. She was running now, slipping, her voice strangled with panic. "Get away from the car!" But Amelie didn't move. She turned in a circle, eyes darting, then spotted it. A branch, thick and frozen, protruding from the edge of the lot. The snow had half covered it, but it looked solid enough. She ran to it, slipped once, caught herself with her hands, scraped her palms on ice. Her fingers were already numb when she wrapped them around the branch and heaved. It groaned, but came loose, heavy, jagged, tipped with ice like a hammer of glass. She turned back to the car. Then she swung. The first strike bounced off with a hollow thud, sending a jolt up her arms. She didn't stop. The second hit cracked a corner of the glass. A starburst pattern bloomed outward. The third, crack! The window split down the center. She coughed, smoke seeping out like a held to reach through. Shards rained down on her gloves, sliced across her wrists. She didn't notice. She threw the branch aside, reached through the jagged opening, then recoiled as something sharp bit into her palm. She looked down, her mitten torn, red blooming beneath the fabric. Still, she didn't stop. She reached again, this time with her other hand, and found fur, burned, slick, twitching. "Hey," she whispered, voice catching. "I've got you, okay? I've got you." She hooked her hands beneath the limp weight, one under the shoulders, one around the ribs. He was heavy, too heavy for her, but she pulled anyway. The dog didn't fight, didn't growl, just groaned softly as she dragged him inch by inch through the broken glass and into the open air. Smoke poured around them, hissing against the snow. Behind her, boots thundered through the lot. Her mother arrived just as Amelie collapsed backward. Juno halfway on top of her, his body trembling with shallow breath. "God, Amelie!" Her mom dropped the bakery bag, yanked the scarf off her daughter's neck and wrapped it around the dog. "What were you thinking?" she cried, eyes wild, hands checking Amelie's arms, her bleeding palms. But Amelie didn't respond. She was staring at the dog. One of his eyes, the one not swollen shut, was open now, just barely, and it was looking straight at her. Smoke still curled into the sky behind them. Sirens hadn't come, no emergency response, no blue lights. Just the three of them, mother, daughter, dog, kneeling in snow that soaked through their pants and turned breath into mist. The wind picked up. Juno's body twitched once, then stilled. But that eye, it never left hers. The storm hadn't let up. It thickened by the hour, folding over Wren Hollow like a woolen blanket soaked in ice. Roads blurred beneath layers of slush, and plows crawled through the town, with amber lights spinning like muted beacons. One by one, streets were scraped clean, only to vanish again minutes later. At 7:06 a.m., a snowplow rumbled down the access road near the abandoned lot, a route that rarely needed clearing, but was on the rotation all the same. The driver was a man named Cal Monroe, 54, flannel jacket, beard dusted with gray and powdered sugar from a forgotten donut in the cab. He had been doing this route for almost 20 years. He didn't expect to see movement, but he did. A flash of red against the white. A child. Cal hit the brakes. The plow groaned to a halt, skidding slightly. He leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, then threw the door open before the truck had fully stopped. Amelie sat in the snow, back against the rusted cruiser, holding a limp German shepherd half in her lap. Blood stained her mittens. Her face was streaked with soot. her hair beside her, frantically trying to wrap the red scarf tighter around the animal's body. Her eyes flicked between her daughter and the dog, panic, gratitude, terror, all layered behind them. Cal waded through the snow. "What the hell?" Amelie looked up, just once, then pointed with her free hand at the cruiser. "He's still in there." The rear door was warped from the heat, the window shattered, smoke still poured in thin gray ribbons from the vents. The interior was blackened, melted in places. The heat had been worse than anyone realized. Cal didn't hesitate. He turned back to his plow, yanked a crowbar from behind the seat, and marched to the car. His boots crunched against frozen glass. Without a word, he jammed the bar into the seam of the door, braced his foot against the frame, and pulled. Metal groaned, bent, screamed like it didn't want to give. But it did. The door swung wide with a snap that echoed across the lot. Smoke spilled out in a wave, acrid, hot, almost angry. And there, fully revealed now in the light of morning, lay Juno. His body was curled inward, legs tucked tight, one paw burned to the pad. His chest rose in shallow, hitching breaths, uneven, like a clock trying to keep time on a dying battery. His fur, once thick and dark, was patchy and matted with soot. His harness had melted into the seat, long gone. No tag, no badge, but he was alive. Cal dropped to his knees, looked at the girl. "You pulled him out of that?" Amelie nodded. He let out a breath. "Jesus." Her mother stood beside her now, gently lifting Juno's hind legs, while Cal reached under the front. Together they lifted him out of the wreckage, his body heavier than expected, limp with exhaustion. "Lay him in the snow," Cal said. "It'll cool the burns." They placed him gently into the snowdrift beside the fence. The cold hissed as it met his skin. He didn't move except for one eye. The same eye that had watched Amelie through the glass now blinked once, slow and strained. Amelie dropped beside him again. Her red scarf slipped from his side. She picked it up, wrapped it tighter this time, tucking it beneath his head like a pillow. "Is he gonna die?" she asked softly. Cal didn't answer. Neither did her mother. But Juno did. Not with words, not even with sound. Just one movement. He turned his head, barely, and looked straight at her. A single second. A silent recognition. A connection not born of speech, but survival. Trust. It was all he had. And for Amelie, it was enough. Right away. She leaned in, nose inches from Juno's face, and whispered, "You're okay. You're okay now." He didn't respond, but he didn't look away. In moments, they had him bundled in every spare blanket Cal could find. Laid gently across the back seat of the snowplow, Amelie crawled in beside him, never releasing his paw. Her mom sat up front, guiding Cal with directions through the snowy town. The cruiser behind them still smoked in silence. The fire was out, but the story had just begun. The engine of the snowplow grumbled against the storm, wheels spinning once before catching traction on the ice-slicked road. Cal gripped the wheel tighter than usual, jaw clenched, eyes flicking between the windshield and the rearview mirror. He wasn't just clearing snow anymore. He was carrying something alive, something fading. In the back seat, wrapped in 3 blankets and a red scarf that still smelled faintly of wood smoke and cinnamon, Juno lay still. His body didn't shiver anymore. That scared Amelie more than anything. She sat beside him, one hand cradling his paw, her mitten soaked through with snow and blood. Her knees were curled to her chest. Her breath came in little puffs, fogging the cold interior. But she never looked away from his face. "Keep talking to him," her mother said gently from the front seat, her voice raw from smoke and fear. "Just keep him here." "I am," Amelie whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm trying." The roads through Wren Hollow had vanished under fresh snowfall. What had once been familiar intersections and sleepy sidewalks were now ghost paths, lined with half-buried stop signs and storefronts with dark windows. Power had gone out in parts of town. Streetlights flickered or didn't come on at all. Most people were indoors. No one knew what this little plow carried. No one saw the silent girl and the burned dog in the back seat, locked in a fight neither of them had chosen. "We can't take him to the emergency vet," Amelie's mother said suddenly. "It's closed. They put a sign on the door last night. Power outage. They evacuated the animals." Cal kept one hand on the wheel, another ready on the gear shift. "So where?" "Grace Lynn," she said, almost to herself. "She's our best shot." Cal glanced over. "Who?" "She lives off Fairpine Road. Used to work the county rotation. Before she went private. Helped our neighbor's retriever last winter after that sled accident. Said she never turns anything away. Even did a surgery in her kitchen once when the clinic's heat failed." Cal blinked. "That's insane." "She's good," her mom said. "She's all we've got." Snow lashed sideways. Bone-deep groans. The tires slipped once, twice, but held. From the back seat, Amelie's voice broke the silence again. "Mom?" "Yes?" "What if he doesn't make it?" Her mother hesitated. Words hovered and fell away. "Then he'll still know you tried," she finally said. "You didn't leave him. That matters more than anything." Amelie looked back at Juno. His chest rose in faint, stuttering breaths. One ear had half melted into the side of his head. His paw twitched only when she squeezed it. But his eye, just the one, still fluttered open from time to time, still sought her face in the blur. "You're not going anywhere," she whispered. "Not yet." Then, almost without thinking, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out Pancake, her worn little stuffed bear, the one that had slept beside her since the nightlight years. Its fur was matted from too many dreams. One button eye was missing. She tucked it beneath Juno's chin. "He'll keep you safe until we get there." Up ahead, a faint blue glow broke through the falling snow. A small neon sign, crooked in the window of a converted farmhouse, nearly buried under icicles and pine limbs. "Dr. Grace Lynn, DVM, emergency on call." Cal leaned forward. "That it?" "That's her," Amelie's mom said. He didn't wait. The snowplow skidded slightly as it pulled into the lot, tires catching slush and gravel. He braked hard. The truck jolted. The engine hissed into silence. Amelie didn't wait for the door to open. She flung it wide and leapt into the snow. Her boots sank to the ankle. She stumbled once, caught herself, then opened the back door. Juno was barely breathing now. Her mother climbed out the other side, rushing to help. Cal grabbed 2 blankets and the crowbar just in case the front door was locked. But it wasn't. Before they could even knock, the porch light flicked on. A woman stepped into view, mid-30s, snow boots, parka, stethoscope hanging from her neck. Her black hair was pulled into a tight braid, eyes sharp, and already reading the situation like someone who had seen too much too fast. She didn't ask for details. She didn't ask what had happened. She saw the dog, saw the girl, and opened the door. "Get him inside. Now." The warmth hit them like a wall. Dry, thick, filled with the scent of iodine, pine cleaner, and faint lavender. The clinic was small, more like a home than a hospital, but the equipment was real. Tables, monitors, IV bags hung from ceiling hooks like ornaments. "Name?" Dr. Lin asked, already clearing the exam table. "Juno," Amelie whispered. The doctor froze, then looked down at the dog's face, and something changed in her eyes. She didn't say a word, just nodded once. Changed. No longer just a house, not just a room with a stethoscope and a steel table. Now it was a battlefield. And on that table, in a tangle of burnt fur and fading breath, lay the soldier. Dr. Grace Lin didn't waste a second. Her parka hit the floor before her gloves did. Her voice, usually calm and deliberate, now cut through the air like a scalpel. "Lay him flat, head elevated. Get the oxygen running. I need warm saline, 200 cc, now." Amelie and her mother stood frozen by the doorway. Cal hovered near the coat rack, unsure if he should stay. Grace looked up, eyes sweeping across the girl, then the dog, and stopped. There, around Juno's neck, half-charred and nearly unreadable, was a scorched metal tag. She bent closer. The engraving was worn down by fire, soot baked into the grooves, but she could still make out the code beneath the ash. K47, Juno. Her heart stilled. No, it couldn't be. She reached for a cloth, wiped the tag clean with shaking fingers. Then she saw it fully. K47, Juno. Unit Metro County Tactical Response. The air shifted. Because 4 years ago, a man had walked into Lincoln Middle School with a sawed-off shotgun and a death wish. Her niece, Molly, had been in the science lab, 6 desks from the door when the man burst in. Police had surrounded the building but couldn't get a clean shot. The hostage negotiator had stalled, tension had thickened like cement. And then Juno had gone in, without command, without hesitation. He'd barreled through the door, teeth bared, fur flying. There had been 1 shot, then 2. Screams. But none of the kids were hit. The man had gone down, taken by surprise, pinned by a blur of muscle and fur and fury. Her niece had crawled under a desk, sobbing, blood spattered on her shoes, but alive. Juno had saved them all. He had been her family's miracle, and now he was here, dying on her table. Grace turned to her assistant, a young vet tech named Clara, who had just arrived, wide-eyed and breathless. "We're losing him. Get the ketamine. We need to sedate him before the shock overtakes his heart." Clara didn't ask why. She just moved. "Should we call the department?" Cal asked, quietly. Grace shook her head. "No, not yet. Not until we know who left him like this." Amelie took a small step forward. He was in a burning car. Grace looked at her, really looked. A child with blood on her mittens, soot on her cheeks, and a stuffed bear tucked under one arm like armor. Her coat smelled of ash and cinnamon. Her eyes didn't look away. "You pulled him out?" Amelie nodded. He cried. No one else heard it. Grace swallowed hard. Then she turned back to the table. "He's got thermal burns on at least 30% of his body. Left hind leg is like my niece, Juno. Now it's my turn." The machines hummed. Lines of saline and morphine and oxygen flowed into the dog's fragile body. His chest hitched. A wet cough rattled up from his lungs and left blood on the table. Grace wiped it away with the same tenderness someone might use on a sleeping child. For the next hour, no one spoke. Clara monitored the vitals. Amelia refused to sit down. Her mother eventually stepped out to call Robert. Cal brewed coffee in the kitchen no one touched, and Grace fought. She cleaned wounds down to the muscle, cut away melted fur, packed ice around his paws, kept pressure on the side of his ribs that no longer rose evenly. She didn't ask how he got here. Not yet. First, she had to keep him here. Then came the part she hated most, the X-ray. When the film slid out of the machine, she froze. 3 ribs cracked, One lung half collapsed. Smoke had coated the bronchi like tar. She saw scarring in the muscle around the heart, and in his spine, bruising. She didn't know yet if he'd walk again, but he was alive, still breathing, still blinking, though barely. And most important of all, he still followed the girl with his eyes. Grace placed a warm towel across his chest and dimmed the overhead light. "He's not out of the woods," she said gently. Amélie looked up, her eyes glassy. "But he's still fighting," Grace added. And across the room, Juno's tail twitched. Only once, but it was enough. The clock above the exam table ticked with a soft, steady rhythm, but no one in the room was counting minutes anymore. They were counting breaths. Juno lay still, the rise and fall of his chest so faint it could have been mistaken from memory. His body was wrapped in thermal pads and bandages soaked in cooling solution. One IV line fed into a vein in his foreleg. The other delivered oxygen through a nose cannula looped awkwardly under his muzzle. Every few seconds, a monitor beeped, the sound thin and wavering, like it wasn't sure how much longer it would get to speak. Dr. Grace Lynn hadn't sat down in hours. She moved around the table with a quiet urgency, eyes flicking between monitors and Juno's vitals, adjusting medications by instinct. Her sleeves were rolled up past her elbows. One wrist was streaked with dried antiseptic. Her gloves had been changed so many times, her knuckles were raw beneath them. But her hands never trembled. She'd seen dogs in worse shape, but not ones who had once stood between a child and a shotgun. Not ones who had saved her family, and certainly not ones who had been left to burn in silence. In the corner of the room, on a folded wool blanket pulled from the tried to usher her out for food or rest, the girl simply shook her head and said, "He needs someone who remembers him." No one argued with that. She watched every movement, every flick of Grace's hand, every adjustment to the IV. Her eyes were too wide for a child, too still, like they were carrying something too heavy for someone so small. Every so often, she would reach up and smooth Juno's ear. The one that hadn't melted, the one that still twitched, just barely, whenever her voice got close. At 8:13 a.m., the door to the clinic burst open. Boots, snow, a voice calling out, "Amélie!" Her head snapped up, and in came Evan Quinn, her father, scarf still flapping behind him, worry written in every muscle. He'd driven across town in the worsening storm, following his wife's frantic call, barely registering half of what she'd said. Something about fire, something about their daughter, and a dog. He hadn't known what to expect, but it wasn't this. He froze in the doorway. The clinic was warm, but it smelled like scorched fur and alcohol. In the center of the room was a table, a dog, a mass of bandages and wires and soft beeping, and beside him, Amélie, still, safe, silent. His heart cracked open all at once. He crossed the room in 2 strides, dropped to his knees and pulled her into his arms. She didn't resist, but she didn't speak either, just buried her face in his coat and held onto his shirt like she was afraid letting go would mean forgetting something important. He held her tighter. Then, finally, his eyes rose to meet Grace's. "What happened?" he asked, voice rough. Grace didn't look up from Juno. Her hands were deep in work, adjusting the oxygen, checking the pulse ox clip on the paw. She only said one word, abandoned. Evan stood slowly, eyes fixed on the dog. There was something noble even in the stillness of Juno's body. Something that didn't fit with the wires or the pain, something that deserved better. "That's a K9, he said quietly. Grace nodded. "K47, she confirmed. "Name's Juno." Evan blinked, memory sparking. "I remember that case. Lincoln Middle School, the hostage taker. That dog went in without a handler." Grace's eyes flicked to him, then back to Juno. "He saved my niece." Evan stared for a long time, then let out a breath like he'd been holding it for years. Again. His eye didn't close, it stayed on her, on the girl who had dragged him from smoke and frost with hands too small for heroism, but a heart too stubborn for silence. Evan took a step closer to the table. "What do you need?" Grace didn't look up. "Time," she said. "Supplies?" "Yes." "Support?" "All of it." "Then you've got it." Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, a dog once erased by paperwork was slowly, painfully returning. Not to strength, not yet, but to memory, to the sound of a child's voice, and the feeling of a hand that refused to let go. The clinic had quieted. The adrenaline from the rescue had ebbed into a kind of exhausted stillness, the way snowfall hushes even the sharpest sounds. Machines hummed low, IV bags swayed gently in place. Somewhere in the corner, Clara, the vet tech, poured herself a mug of instant coffee with trembling hands, though she didn't drink it. Juno slept, or at least something close to it. The sedation was deep enough to dull his pain, but not so far that he drifted out of reach. His one good eye would open from time to time, hazy and blinking, only to close again with a soft exhale. And across the room, Grace Lynn stood at her desk with a folder in her hand and rage building behind her ribs. Not the kind of rage that shouts, the quieter kind. The kind that simmers low and lethal, fed by disbelief. She had pulled the records while Clara cleaned Juno's burned paw. At first, it was routine. Verify microchip ID. Match the field logs. Establish proof of ownership in case anyone from the department came looking. But the deeper she read, the colder her hands became. Because Juno's file didn't end where it should have. There was no retirement order, no ceremony, no formal medical release or notation of behavioral discharge. Instead, she found a single typed paragraph stamped with an internal seal. Subject K47, to be transferred for containment and behavioral evaluation. Unfit for field reassignment. No public statement. Await further directive. No signature, no explanation. Just that word again, containment. A euphemism in every institution. The velvet glove over a closed fist. In Grace's old rotations, it had been used for animals deemed aggressive beyond rehabilitation. The ones no one wanted to admit were once heroes. The ones too inconvenient to rehome. The ones easier to erase than explain. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. This wasn't retirement, she said aloud. Evan, who still hadn't taken head. They were going to kill him. Grace said nothing. She didn't have to. Evan sat back slowly, the file still in his hand. Something shifted in his face. Not shock, not even grief. Something sharper. He was a teacher by trade, a quiet man who believed in reason, in rules, in systems that, despite their flaws, mostly worked. But every man has a line that turns belief into fury, and this was his. "This was sanctioned," he muttered. "Filed, stamped, and no one said a word." "Not even a press release," Grace added. "They just buried him." Evan stood abruptly, began to pace. "You know what this means. It means someone ordered this. Someone who had the authority to erase a canine's entire history because he disobeyed a single command, and no one questioned it." Grace nodded slowly. "Because questioning it means admitting the system failed, and no one in power likes the taste of their own guilt." He ran a hand down his face, exhaled hard. "They didn't even give him a handler, just loaded him into a car and walked away. During a snowstorm, during a fire, and no one was supposed to notice," Grace said bitterly. "Except a 7-year-old who still believes in listening when something cries." Evan stared at the file again, then closed it softly and walked to the front desk, pulling out his laptop from his satchel. "What are you doing?" Grace asked. "Digging." "Into what?" "Everything." He typed like a man possessed. In seconds he was deep into the department's public records site, pulling commendation archives. Juno's name was everywhere: articles, photos, ceremony logs from the hostage case 4 years ago, local coverage, stake recognition. A picture of Juno standing tall beside a row of third-graders, badge shining. Then, abruptly, nothing. No farewell, no deactivation, no thank you for your service. Just a vanishing act. Evan dug deeper. He pulled up handler assignments, cross-checked training certifications, found Officer Travis Hale, Juno's last recorded partner, searched for disciplinary actions, searched for transfers. Then he froze. "What is it?" Grace asked. Evan turned the screen toward her. A PDF, recently uploaded, dated 2 weeks ago. A notice of voluntary retirement for Officer Hale. Effective immediately. No mention of K-47, no mention of reassignment. Grace stared. He left the force. Right before the file says Juno was transferred and never reported the dog missing. They looked at each other, and Grace whispered the one truth neither of them had wanted to say out loud. He knew. Silence fell again, but this time but she understood betrayal. She leaned in closer, lips brushing Juno's ear. "You're not a mistake," she whispered. "You're not broken. They're just scared of things that love too much." And as if in response, the dog let out a soft exhale. Not pain, not relief, something closer to knowing. The clinic at midnight was the kind of quiet that made walls breathe. Outside, the storm had settled into a frozen stillness, and the wind no longer howled, it whispered. The town of Fairpine lay buried beneath a blanket of moonlit snow, the kind that silenced even the plows. Inside, a single lamp glowed in the corner of the recovery room, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. Juno lay on the warmed surgical mat, chest rising in shallow rhythm. The bandages had been changed, the burns cleaned again. A heat pad pressed gently to his side. He didn't stir much, but he was alive. And that alone, Grace reminded herself, was a miracle. She hadn't gone home. Neither had Robert. He had dozed off in the chair by the window, coat still on, hands crossed over his chest. Amelie had been carried home earlier, her mother gently scooping her up after she fell asleep with her head resting on Juno's flank. Grace had insisted she get rest, but Grace herself couldn't rest. Something about the report wouldn't leave her. Containment, it echoed. She sat in the office, going over records again, sipping lukewarm coffee, the overhead light flickering every few minutes from the cold. She was mid-sentence in an email draft to a colleague when she heard it. A metallic click, not from the heater, not the coffee pot, something deliberate. She froze. Then came the sound again, the rear door, the one they never used, locked from the outside with a keypad only staff had access to, except it wasn't locked anymore. Grace stood slowly, didn't grab her phone, didn't call out. Something primal whispered, "Don't make a sound." She stepped out into the main hall, slippers brushing against the floor. Then she saw it, the silhouette, a figure, dark, moving low past the kennel room toward the recovery wing. Gloved hand clutching something metallic. Grace narrowed her eyes. A syringe, long, prepped. She felt it before she thought it. He was here for Juno. She didn't scream. She acted. The man didn't hear her coming. Grace moved like breath, silent, controlled. And when he opened the recovery room door, she grabbed the metal flashlight from the wall and slammed it down on the shelf behind him. The crash startled him. He spun. Their eyes locked. Even behind the mask, she saw it. Father. But in that second, something deeper kicked in. He charged through the front doors just as the intruder threw them open. The cold slapped his face. The man was fast, already halfway across the lot toward a waiting van with no plates. Robert pushed harder, boots crunching snow. The man slipped once, gave Robert just enough time to tackle him at the side of the vehicle. They hit the ground hard. Snow flew, fists struggled. A knee connected with Robert's ribs, but he grunted, held on. "Who sent you?" The man didn't speak. Robert yanked the mask halfway down. Young, maybe late 20s, clean-shaven, eyes sharp, trained. Then, pepper spray. The intruder jerked something from his coat, sprayed blindly. Robert reeled back, eyes burning. And in that second, the man kicked free, jumped into the van and peeled off, wheels skidding, disappearing down the icy road into the night. Grace reached Robert seconds later, eyes wide. "You okay?" He nodded, coughing. "What was in the syringe?" she asked, breath catching. He looked at her. Didn't get close enough to see. They walked back in silence, the only sound their breaths and the fading echo of the van's tires. Back inside, Grace picked up what had fallen from the intruder's coat during the scuffle. A metal badge, scratched, but still legible. County Animal Control. They stood over it together. The silver glint caught the light in a way that felt cruel. "He had clearance," Robert whispered. "He didn't need to break in." "Unless he wasn't here on official orders," Grace finished. Robert nodded grimly. He came to finish what someone else started, in silence, no paperwork, just a needle and a body bag. Grace stared at the badge for a long moment, then placed it in an evidence pouch. "I'll get this to a friend I trust, off the record, quietly." Then she looked over at Juno, still unconscious, unaware how close he had come to death a second time. "They're still afraid of him." Robert didn't respond right away. He walked over to the window, wiped a patch of frost with his sleeve. "They should be," he murmured, "because now he's not alone." The morning after the break-in, Fairpine woke under a sky the color of wet ash. A low fog crawled over the snowbanks, muffling sound, blurring lines. The town still slept, heaters buzzing inside quiet homes, coffee pots dripping into half-empty mugs. But in one small veterinary clinic tucked near the woods, Something was beginning to stir louder than the storm ever had. Robert sat alone in Grace's office, elbows on the desk, eyes locked on the blinking cursor of her old laptop. He hadn't spoken much since the night before. Spray, but it wasn't the pain that burned, it was silence, calculated official silence. They tried to bury a hero and send a needle in the night to finish the job. And if he didn't act now, the next story told about Juno would be in past tense. He picked up Grace's landline. His thumb hovered over the number. "You sure?" Grace asked from the doorway, arms crossed over her chest, a tired calm in her voice. Robert didn't answer immediately. Then, "If they want silence." His voice was low, steady. "Then let's give them a microphone." He dialed. By 9 a.m., word was out. A local freelance reporter named Eliza Baird answered the call first. She had covered school board meetings and bake sales for years, but Robert's message made her heart skip. "A police dog left to burn alive in our town?" He didn't embellish. Didn't need to. She was at the clinic within an hour, camera crew in tow, just 2 kids with flannel jackets and beat-up gear from college. But their lenses were sharp, and their questions sharper. Grace let them in through the side door. They moved quietly, respectfully. No dramatic angles, no hungry cameras shoved in faces. Just presence. Truth. Robert stood in front of Juno's recovery cot, where the dog lay sleeping, legs splinted, breathing slow but stronger than yesterday. He placed one hand gently on the German shepherd's flank. "This is Juno," he began. A pause, not for effect, for breath, for weight. 4 years ago, this dog saved my daughter's life. She was at a park near a hostage situation. Juno wasn't even assigned to that perimeter, but he broke rank, ran through gunfire, shielded her with his body, took a bullet to the rib. The room was silent. He disobeyed orders, and because of that, they called him unfit. They locked him in a cruiser during a snowstorm. No handler, no report, no funeral. He looked into the camera. They wanted him to disappear, but heroes don't disappear, not while we're still breathing. The first story aired on local Fairpine News by noon. By 2 p.m., it had gone regional. Facebook groups began to fill with hashtags, some old, some new. Hashtag Justice for Juno, hashtag K47 never forgets, hashtag Not Just a Dog. People who had never met the dog shared photos, stories. Someone posted a grainy surveillance image from years ago, Juno in his vest, nose to the ground, outside a courthouse. Another remembered seeing him at the town's 4th of July parade 3 years back. Marching beside Officer Clint Mallory, there were tears, and there was anger. But above all, there was something else. Whispers, in bakeries, in church parking lots, in the barber shop near Oak Street. "Did you hear about the dog? They tried to kill him, quietly. Same K9 unit that busted the mayor's nephew last year. Makes you wonder. What else are young to know the weight of news cycles or politics? But she knew when grown-ups whispered. She turned to Grace. "Why are they talking about Juno on the radio?" Grace knelt beside her, brushed the girl's hair back from her cheek. "Because sometimes," she said softly, "truth needs help being heard." Amelie nodded slowly, then walked back to Juno's side. She slipped her red mitten onto his paw. By dusk, the town's newspaper had printed an early evening edition with a front-page headline, "Police dog left to die, saved by a child's courage." The photo beneath it showed Amelie, face half hidden behind her scarf, crouching beside a snow-covered cruiser, smoke curling behind her. No one told her she was a hero. She wouldn't have understood. She only knew she had done what she had to do. That night, Robert received a call from an unknown number. A voice, calm, official, said, "You've made your point, that'll be enough." Robert didn't respond. The voice added, "You're not protecting the town, you're destabilizing it." Robert exhaled into the receiver, then quietly, "No, I'm reminding it what it stands for." He hung up and sent the recording to Eliza. By sunrise, the story was no longer Fairpine's secret. The yellow news van from Channel 7 rolled into town just as the church bells chimed 8. Its tires crunched over frozen slush, trailing exhaust in the brittle air. Two reporters stepped out, jackets zipped to their chins, eyes already scanning the street like they knew this would be more than just a segment. Their faces were familiar, evening anchors, not interns. They didn't come for puff pieces. They came for reckoning. Across town, people were already gathered outside Fairpine Veterinary. Some brought flowers, others brought signs. One said in looping red marker, "Heroes don't get abandoned." Another simply read, #Justice for Juno. And then there was the boy, maybe 10 years old, holding up a drawing of a German shepherd with angel wings. No words, just a name at the bottom in child's handwriting, Juno. Inside the clinic, Grace Lynn peeked through the blinds and whispered, "It's happening." Robert stood behind her, phone buzzing non-stop in his coat pocket. Every few seconds it lit up, unknown numbers, voicemails, emails with subject lines like National Pet Alliance interview request, Dogs Rights Foundation reaching out, a message from a woman who met Juno in 2019, please read. One message came from a soldier stationed in Kandahar, another from a retired canine handler in Colorado who'd followed Juno's career back when Unit K-47 was still operational. And then just past 9 a.m., Twitter cracked open like a dam. A single tweet lit the fuse. At Eliza Baird reports, a child saved a police dog from being burned alive in an abandoned cruiser. His name was Juno. He disobeyed an order to protect a child. Watch. #Justice for Juno. #Hero dog left to die. The tweet went viral within 40 minutes. By noon, it had crossed state lines. People who didn't know Fairpine, couldn't point to it on a map, now shared its story with fury and tears. Instagram reels began popping up with dramatic piano music overlaid on still images. Juno lying in the vet bed, Amelie's mitten on his paw, a snow-covered cruiser with smoke rising faintly behind cracked glass. TikTok users reposted the newscast and added captions like, "I didn't know a dog's loyalty could make me cry like this. If Juno dies, we riot." Even celebrities joined in. A country singer with 5 million followers posted a video petting his own shepherd and whispering, "Juno, we've got your 6." Back at the clinic, Juno stirred. Not fully awake, but more aware than before. His ears twitched slightly at the crowd murmuring beyond the windows, the distant buzz of a mic check, the hum of voices raised not in protest, but protection. He lifted his head for the first time in 2 days. Grace knelt beside him, stunned. "Hey there," she whispered, stroking his fur. "You feel that?" Outside, Amelie stood beside her father, watching the growing sea of strangers. She didn't understand Twitter or hashtags or national coverage. But she understood this. People were standing up for someone who couldn't speak. And somehow, they were standing up for her, too. Later that afternoon, Channel 7 went live. The reporter's voice, solemn but firm, carried across the nation. "He was once hailed as a hero. Juno, a German shepherd assigned to Unit K-47, saved countless lives, including a child during a standoff in 2020. But after one act of defiance, choosing humanity over command, he was discarded like debris. No ceremony, no thanks, just a locked cruiser and a snowstorm meant to erase him. What they didn't count on was a little girl named Amelie Quinn, and the world watching." Fairpine's mayor issued a vague statement by evening. "We are conducting an internal review to determine the facts surrounding the canine officer's discharge and current condition." But it was too late. Screenshots of internal documents leaked within hours, redacted pages, memos stamped containment evaluation, a quietly signed transfer order dated 3 days before Juno was found. Someone had tried to scrub the past, but the internet remembers. By nightfall, a GoFundMe campaign had reached over $110,000. Its title, "For Juno, Because Heroes Deserve Better." The description read, "This isn't just for medical care. It's for truth, for protection, for every voiceless canine discarded like broken tools when they choose compassion over commands." And somewhere, across the sea of shared screens, reposted images, and tears shed by strangers, a ripple began. One that wouldn't stop at Fairpine. One that asked a question too big to ignore. How many heroes have we forgotten because they didn't follow orders, but followed their hearts? The hospital room wasn't large. It smelled faintly of antiseptic and snow melt, the kind that clung to boots left too close to a heater. The only light came from a lamp in the corner and the soft green flicker of the monitor above the bed, where a heart kept trying. The beeping was uneven. Some moments it raced, others it paused too long, as though considering whether to give up, but a small hand never let go. Amelie sat curled in the chair beside the bed, legs tucked under her coat, eyes rimmed red not from tears. Inside was now wrapped gently across Juno's chest like a blanket. It looked out of place against the gray of his matted fur and the IV line that ran like a lifeline from his front leg to the fluid bag above. But somehow it belonged there, a patch of warmth against a body gone cold. She held his paw in both hands, thumbs tracing the worn pads as if reminding him he was still here. Still real, still hers. "I brought the scarf because it always makes me feel brave," she whispered, though no one had asked. Behind her, a nurse paused in the doorway, phone in hand. She didn't interrupt. She just lifted the camera and pressed record. The footage hit the internet an hour later. No music, no narration. Just 32 seconds of silence, broken only by the beep of the heart monitor and the whisper of a child. A whisper the microphone barely caught. "You don't have to be alone anymore." The image of the girl in the oversized coat, her cheeks still flushed from cold, sitting beside a near lifeless German shepherd, spread like fire on dry leaves. By midnight, it had been shared 2.4 million times. By dawn, it had a name: The Girl and the Monitor. People didn't scroll past it. They paused. They watched it all the way through, and then they shared it. Comments poured in. "My daughter asked if she could write Juno a letter. I'm a grown man. I haven't cried in years. This broke me. There's something about her hand on his paw. It says more than any speech I've heard this year." One woman wrote, "When my brother died in Afghanistan, it was his K9 that laid beside the coffin, refusing to move. Watching this, I don't know. It healed something." Someone else tagged NASA and wrote, "Put this on the Voyager probe. Let the universe know what love looks like." Amélie didn't know about any of this. She only knew that Juno's breathing had steadied, that when she leaned in and whispered again, his ear twitched. She told him about the squirrel she named Jeremy, the one that stole her muffin last fall. About her teacher, Mrs. Levin, who wore mismatched socks on purpose. And she told him softly, but seriously, that even if he couldn't be a police dog anymore, she'd still choose him, every time. "You saved someone before," she said, stroking the line of his jaw. "Now it's our turn." Her voice cracked on our, but she didn't cry. Outside, more people gathered. Some brought candles, others brought hand-drawn posters of Juno, traced from that viral image. Grace stood near the window, watching the growing sea of faces. Robert came beside her, tablet in hand, scrolling. "You've seen this?" he asked, voice low. Grace nodded. "The Girl and the Monitor?" He flipped the screen to show her. CNN, BBC, ABC. A clip had aired in whispering to Juno, "Still holding on. She doesn't even know." She doesn't need to, Robert replied. She already did her part. Now it's the world's turn. Later that evening, a call came in to the clinic. The woman didn't give her name, only said through static and tears, "I used to train bomb dogs for K-47. Juno was one of the best. I thought he died 2 years ago. Please tell the girl. Tell her he had no one left, until now." Grace held the phone a long time after the call ended. Then she walked into Juno's room and whispered, "They remember, old boy. They finally remember." At midnight, the monitor gave a single, steady beep, and then another, longer, stronger. Juno stirred beneath the scarf. His eyes, still glazed, found the girl, not with full clarity, but enough to see the one thing he'd waited for since the frost took his breath and smoke stole his sight. A small human, not demanding anything, just promising to stay. The snow had slowed to a hush outside Fairpine Veterinary Clinic. For the first time in days, it wasn't falling sideways, wasn't screaming against windows. It simply drifted. Inside, the hush was different, tense. Every sound felt amplified. The drip of saline from Juno's IV, the soft beeping of the heart monitor, the click of Grace Lynn's boots on the linoleum as she paced the corridor just outside the recovery room. She hadn't slept more than an hour since Juno arrived. She hadn't left either. When the phone rang at 6:47 a.m., she was already holding it. She didn't check the caller ID. She already knew. "Fairpine Vet, Dr. Lynn speaking." The voice on the other end was polite, too polite. It carried that practiced tone used by officers who were trained in de-escalation, not compassion. "Good morning, Doctor. This is Lieutenant Harlan Mason, Public Affairs, Fair County PD." Grace said nothing. "We'd like to thank you for the excellent emergency care you've provided to K9 Unit 47's former asset. We understand the public attention this situation has drawn, and we want to clarify a few things to avoid further confusion." She leaned against the counter, jaw tightening. "He has a name. His name is Juno." A pause, then the voice continued, undeterred. "Of course, Juno. We're dispatching animal control to retrieve him this afternoon. He'll be transported back to county facilities for review and transfer. We appreciate your cooperation in preserving protocol." "No." The word came out sharp, clear, a scalpel cutting through politeness. There was a second of silence. "I'm sorry?" the officer asked. "I said no," Grace repeated. "He's not going anywhere." Another pause, longer. "Handler. No documentation. No damn dignity. You gave up your rights to him the moment you tried to erase him." "Dr. Lynn." The voice was colder now. Less PR, more command. "We're trying to avoid escalation. We believe in resolution. Quiet resolution." Grace's laugh was soft, almost sad. "Too late for quiet," she said. "You handed him to the fire. A 7-year-old girl had to drag him out, and the whole country saw it." There was movement behind her. Robert stepping out of the back room, phone already in his hand, filming. He gave her a subtle nod. "We are not the enemy," the officer said slowly. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," Grace said. "This is exposure, and you're scrambling." Outside, someone began hammering a new sign into the snowbank by the entrance. Another hand-painted message from a local high schooler. "A department forgets. A girl remembers." Grace looked out the window and breathed slowly. "Tell your superiors," she continued, "that if they try to retrieve Juno by force, I'll hand every file I have, medical records, photos, the security footage, to the press, unedited. I will name names. I will show the world what a quiet removal looks like. You're interfering with departmental procedure. I'm protecting a patient. He's not your patient. He's not your dog." Another long silence. Then the officer said, "You'll regret this, Dr. Lin." Grace didn't flinch. "No," she said. "You will." And she hung up. The clinic hallway seemed to exhale with her. She turned to Robert. "Get me every copy of Juno's intake photos. I want timestamps, injury records, everything." Robert nodded. "Already printing." Grace stepped into the waiting area, where Amelie sat drawing another picture for Juno. This time, it was a big sun with a paw print in the center. She looked up, eyes curious. "Was that the police?" the girl asked. "Yes," Grace replied. "They wanted to know if Juno liked pancakes or waffles." Amelie grinned. Grace knelt down and took her hand, the same one that had shattered glass and bled through the snow. The bandages were fraying now, colored by marker and faint jelly stains. "Thank you," Grace said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up." An hour later, a black van labeled Animal Control crept slowly past the clinic. It didn't stop, not yet, but they were watching now, waiting, and so was the town. It began not with sirens, but with silence, the kind of silence that made birds stop singing, that made even the snowflakes slow, as if they, too, were watching. A matte gray van marked Fair County Animal Control pulled up just after noon. Clinic. Grace Lin stood at the reception counter, white coat unbuttoned, stethoscope still slung around her neck like a badge of quiet defiance. Her eyes never left the windshield of the van. Behind her, Robert was adjusting the television above the front desk. Channel 7 was already broadcasting live. The little red on-air box glowed in the corner of the screen. "Are they gonna take him?" Amelie asked softly. Grace looked down at the girl beside her. "No," she said, "not today." At 12:17 p.m. the van doors opened. 2 officers stepped out. One wore the navy blue Animal Control uniform, the other, plain clothes but with a clipboard tucked under his arm. Between them they carried a collapsible cage and a leather leash, looped tightly like a noose. They didn't speak as they approached the front door. The wind carried only the faint rustle of their coats and the wet squeak of boots on snow. Amelie saw the leash first, and she moved. She stepped between them and the door, a small figure in a red coat 2 sizes too big, her scarf trailing behind her like a flag. Her boots left tiny prints in the snow, but her stance was unmoving. The taller officer blinked. "Sweetheart, we need to—" "No," Amelie said. Her voice didn't tremble. Behind her, the clinic door opened. Grace stepped out, not speaking but not backing away either. "We're here under directive from the department," the man with the clipboard began, raising it slightly like a shield. "K9 Unit Asset 47 was marked for evaluation and transfer. We've been instructed to reclaim—" "He's not property," Grace said. The second officer, the one in uniform, adjusted his gloves. "We're just doing our job." "So was he," Robert said, as he emerged with a camera already recording. "And he saved a child doing it." The man with the clipboard sighed. "This doesn't have to be confrontational. We're not the enemy here." "Then why bring a cage?" Grace asked. Her voice was ice. "He's recovering from smoke inhalation, hypothermia, internal trauma, and you bring a cage? We're following policy. Policy nearly killed him." Behind them, a rumble rolled through the parking lot. The Channel 7 van pulled in, cameras already lifted. A reporter jumped out, wind whipping her coat, hair matted with sleet. She waved. "We're live!" she shouted, clearly for the benefit of everyone. The officers stiffened. Grace didn't. Neither did Amelie. The cameraman panned slowly across the scene, the cage on the snow, the clipboard still clutched tight. The little girl standing barefooted in resolve. She's the one, right?" the clipboard officer whispered, nodding toward Amélie from the footage. Grace nodded. "The girl who saved your dog." The uniformed officer lowered his eyes. In the distance, a few townspeople had begun to gather. One elderly man brought a lawn chair. Another woman had a baby strapped to her chest and a steaming mug in her hand. No one said anything. They just stood, watching. The man with the clipboard looked around. "We're not equipped to handle this kind of media attention." "Then maybe you should have equipped yourselves with a conscience," Robert said. The camera turned to Amélie. She didn't look scared. She looked like someone who had already seen what people were capable of, both the cruelty and the courage, and she had made her choice. "We'll return with a warrant," the clipboard officer finally muttered. He stepped back. The other one followed, cage still folded but clenched tight like regret in his hand. They reached the van. Before they got in, Amélie spoke again. "If you come back with a cage," she said, "bring one big enough for me, too." The reporter's jaw dropped. The camera stayed steady. The officers got in the van. It reversed slowly, then pulled away. Inside, the tension broke like thawing glass. Grace leaned against the door, eyes closed for just a moment. Robert laughed under his breath, filming Amélie as she walked back in, scarf fluttering, cheeks flushed pink from cold and pride. Juno hadn't seen it. He was asleep, wrapped in layers of blankets and wires, but his paw twitched, as if even in sleep he knew someone had stood watch. By the end of the week, Grace Lynn's veterinary clinic no longer smelled like antiseptic and iodine. It smelled like hope, warm paper, sealed envelopes, soft yarn, the tang of hand-knit wool scarves left by strangers, crayons pressed too hard into cardstock, ink from hands that had once worn service gloves. The clinic had become more than a place of recovery. It had become a refuge and a reckoning. Outside, the wind howled like it always did in late February, but the front window of the clinic was now a wall of color, posters, drawings, folded hearts with childlike handwriting, "Thank you, Juno, hero dog, stay strong," a laminated photo of a soldier in uniform saluting beside a German shepherd, signed only, "I never forgot you, partner." Inside, the front desk was overflowing, baskets of granola bars and mugs of soup left by locals, donation envelopes stuffed with small bills and larger notes. "This is for Juno, for what he did for my brother in 16. He sniffed out the bomb at my school," he barked before the gas leak was even reported. Some letters came from across the country, one postmarked from Idaho written on lined paper in slanted handwriting. "My son was hiding under a bed during the Anderson hostage situation. We were told no one could reach him. Then Juno went in. My son still talks about the angel dog with the eyes that didn't blink. You don't owe us answers, but we owe him our voices." Grace read them all, some with tears, others with clenched fists. The media dubbed it the Fairpine standoff. But to the people walking through that clinic door, quietly placing sandwiches or handmade blankets or simply pressing their palms to the glass, it wasn't a story. It was personal. Channel 7 ran a nightly segment called Letters to Juno. A quiet anchor would read one letter, slowly, gently, as the screen faded to the image of Amélie resting beside Juno's cot, her scarf now draped gently across his chest. Sometimes his paw twitched, sometimes his ear flicked toward her. Always he stayed. But not everyone was rooting for them. The department's PR division released a carefully worded statement calling the fire an equipment failure involving a decommissioned vehicle. They labeled Juno an inactive canine undergoing review. They never said why no handler had been assigned, why no one had come for him. "We followed protocol," the spokesperson insisted. "The situation is being reviewed internally." But the public wasn't buying it. Not when a 7-year-old girl had risked her life to pull a dog out of a burning cruiser. Not when hundreds of voices began flooding the department's social pages with hashtags like "Justice for Juno" and "Who left him there?" Not when veterans started speaking up. One morning, a man arrived at the clinic on crutches. He didn't say much, just limped to the front desk and handed Grace a laminated photo. In it, a younger version of himself was crouched behind a Humvee. Juno sat at his side, muzzle dusty, ears high, eyes focused forward. "Fallujah," the man said quietly. He walked ahead of us through every corridor. Found 6 IEDs in 1 week. Saved my whole unit. Grace looked at the picture, then back to the man. "He's been more loyal than most people I know," he added, before nodding at the room behind her, where Juno lay beneath slow-dripping IVs and beeping monitors, and walked out without waiting for a reply. By week's end, the clinic had received 97 handwritten letters, 18 children's drawings, 34 pairs of socks, 5 blankets, 2 handmade dog tags, and 1 fully knitted replica of Juno, down to the scar on his left shoulder. Amélie carried it everywhere. Inside Juno's room, things were quiet. Not because they'd given up, but because they refused to let chaos breach the threshold. Grace administered fluids while humming softly. She didn't know the tune's name, only that it made Juno's breathing even. Amélie sat beside him, reading from a picture book about dogs who chased the moon. Robert would stop by in the afternoons, often with printed screenshots of messages people had sent from across the country. He read them aloud like prayers. Even Juno's tail began to twitch in rhythm. But outside, the narratives were clashing like storms. The department silence. Before the fire, they remembered the dog who didn't hesitate, who chose the child instead of the order, who bore no grudge even now, as his body fought to hold on. This wasn't about policy anymore. It was about conscience. That night, as the wind picked up and the power flickered, Amélie leaned her head against Juno's side. She whispered a secret, no louder than snow falling. "You're not a story, Juno," she said. "You're real." And you stayed. His ear twitched, just once, as if to say, "So did you." The clinic had learned how to live in stillness. Every beep from the monitor, every sigh from the vents above Juno's cot, had become part of the rhythm of the place. The world outside kept moving, protests, press statements, murmurs from the mayor's office, but inside the recovery room, time slowed to the pace of a heartbeat, hanging in limbo. Juno hadn't moved in 3 days. His breaths came shallow and measured, like each one was a choice, a decision to stay. Until the morning the snow light shifted, and something changed. It started as nothing, just a tiny shift beneath the blanket where his paw lay curled. Amélie was there, as she always was, sitting cross-legged beside his cot, her chin tucked into her red scarf, one mittened hand resting gently atop his fur. She wasn't speaking. Not today. Just humming the same made-up melody she'd sung for days. She didn't expect him to move. But then he did. The slightest tremble under her fingertips, a flicker like a whisper beneath his pads. Her hand jerked back instinctively, then froze. Her eyes widened. "Dr. Grace," she gasped, scrambling to her feet. Grace was already across the room, clipboard in hand, but the urgency in Amélie's voice made her drop everything. She didn't ask what the girl had seen. She saw it for herself. Juno's left paw twitched again, once, twice, then stilled. Grace leaned over him, fingers gentle, trained. She touched the tendon just above the pad. No reflex. She moved to the shoulder, still nothing. Then, softly, she tapped the inside of his thigh, an old field technique she hadn't used since her early days assisting military vets. The leg jerked, not much, just a flutter, a ripple beneath the fur, but it was enough. Grace's breath caught in her throat. "Amélie," she said barely above a whisper. He moved. "I told you," the little girl beamed. "He's waking up." "No," Grace said, eyes filling with something she'd fought to suppress for days. "He's remembering." That afternoon, the clinic was quieter than rebuild between memory and muscle. His eyes still didn't open, but they flickered now, soft shutters beneath closed lids, as if chasing something only he could see. And when Amélie returned to sit beside him, book in hand, scarf trailing behind her, Juno's ears shifted, just slightly, toward her voice. "Tell me what you see," Grace murmured, not to Amélie, but to herself. "Where are you right now, Juno?" His vitals were stronger, his pulse steadier. The swelling around his lungs had receded. But it wasn't just biology Grace was watching for anymore. It was recognition, redemption. Late that evening, after Amélie had been gently coaxed home to rest, Grace stood alone beside the cot. Juno was still now, not lifeless, but resting, his breathing deeper, measured. She thought of the first time she saw him 4 years ago, bounding through the debris of a collapsed school building, nose to the ground, tail rigid. She had been on the other side of the caution tape, watching with hundreds of others. Then the cheers, then the silence, then the sudden movement. He'd emerged from rubble carrying her niece's pink shoe. And then, 20 minutes later, the girl herself. Grace never forgot that moment, and she was certain now, as she watched his leg twitch again, that neither did he. The next morning, Robert entered the clinic with coffee in one hand and a stack of overnight letters in the other. He set them down, scanned the room, and saw Grace standing at the window of Juno's room. She wasn't looking out. She was watching him and smiling. "What is it?" he asked, stepping in slowly. "Watch," Grace whispered. She didn't speak louder, as if saying it out loud would scatter the fragile moment like smoke. Robert followed her gaze. Amélie was back again, of course. Kneeling beside the cot, her fingers stroking Juno's paw, reading from the same picture book as always. Her scarf had slipped from her shoulder and now lay draped across Juno's chest like a banner. And then, unmistakably, his tail moved, just once. Not a spasm, not a tremor, a wag. Robert's breath caught. Holy. "He remembers her," Grace said, eyes damp. "That wasn't reflex?" "No, that was choice." Robert stared. Then slowly, reverently, he whispered, "They're gonna lose their minds." Grace nodded. "Let them." Outside, snow began to fall again. But inside the small clinic in Fairpine, a war-scarred dog stirred beneath soft blankets, and a little girl with a red scarf smiled like she'd never known how to stop. The forgotten hero was waking, not just to life, but to love. It happened just past 3:17 p.m. Grace hadn't meant to record. You could see the recovery room bathed in soft, wintry light. Juno's chest rising in rhythm with the monitor. Amélie kneeling beside him, her face close to his, whispering something only he could hear. Then he moved. Not just a twitch this time. His head, heavy with pain and sedation, lifted by inches. Enough to sway, enough to lean. And with effort that seemed to summon everything he had left, Juno pressed his nose against the red wool of her coat sleeve. The girl gasped. The dog's tail moved, one slow, deliberate sway, and the world changed. Grace didn't post the video immediately. She showed it to Robert first, then to Amélie's parents, then to Juno's case file. And then, with trembling fingers and a caption that simply read, "The world tried to bury him, but love remembered the way back." She uploaded it. The video hit 4,000 views in under an hour. It crossed 100,000 by midnight. And by the time the sun rose over Fairpine the next day, it was being translated into 6 languages, dubbed over with soft piano music, and re-uploaded by thousands with titles like Hero Dog Wakes to Child's Voice and Proof That Love Heals. Then came the celebrities. An actress in Los Angeles tweeted it to her 12 million followers with, "I don't know who needs to see this today, but I cried like a child. #Justice for Juno." A former Marine-turned-senator posted, "This dog deserves a medal, not a muzzle. Someone's got explaining to do." An NFL quarterback changed his profile picture to the freeze frame of Juno nudging Amelie's sleeve. The tail twitch wasn't just a sign of recovery. It was a symbol of loyalty, of survival, of quiet defiance in a world that too often forgets its heroes. At the Fairpine Clinic, the phones rang off the hook, not just reporters now, but veterans, rescue dog trainers, canine handlers from Phoenix, from Fargo, from Queens, vets in Oregon offering consults, a specialist from Denver volunteering to fly in for free, a retired handler from Boston, voice cracked with emotion, left a voicemail saying, "I knew Juno. I trained beside him. That dog pulled a kid from a minefield, and they did this to him?" Amelie didn't understand all of it. She didn't know what going viral meant, but she noticed how everyone at the clinic moved differently now. Like every step mattered. Like every moment near Juno was sacred. When a new blanket arrived in the mail, a hand-stitched quilt with the words, "Thank you for not giving up," sewn in gold, Grace laid it over Juno's cot without a word. Left in an abandoned cruiser. Who gave the order? What was a department trying to erase? The footage, gentle and wordless, became louder than any press conference, louder than any denial. You can't silence a moment like that, especially not when the world has seen it blink. That night, Robert stood outside the clinic, watching snowfall dance in the streetlights. He scrolled through his phone slowly, reading comments beneath the video. He knew her. "That tail wag broke me. If a dog can come back from that, maybe I can too." He set the phone down, breathing into his hands for warmth. Then he walked back inside, past the front desk, now lined with thank you cards, past the whiteboard, tallying letters from every state in the U.S., and into Juno's room. Amelie was asleep in the chair beside the cot, scarf wrapped around her like a promise. Juno's head lifted slightly when Robert entered, and again his tail swayed. Just once. Enough. "Welcome back, partner," Robert said softly, his voice cracking just enough to betray him. He didn't care. The whole world had cried already. He was just catching up. The idea didn't come with fanfare. It came quietly, like most things that matter. It was late, just past 9 p.m., and Amelie was seated at the kitchen table, legs swinging beneath her chair, a mug of lukewarm cocoa beside her untouched. She had a crayon in one hand and was scribbling something across a folded sheet of printer paper. Grace was on the phone with a reporter from the Chronicle, and Robert sat across from Amelie, fingers curled around his second cup of black coffee. He hadn't spoken much in the last hour. His mind had been chewing on something, like a dog working a buried bone. Amelie looked up, eyes tired but steady. "I want to help him stay free," she whispered. Robert blinked. "You already did, kiddo." She shook her head. "No, I want more people to help, like a promise. She pushed the paper across the table. On it was a drawing, Juno in his recovery cot, with hearts around him. At the top, written in thick red crayon, were 4 words: "Let hero dogs live." The next morning, Robert turned the crayon into a headline. He drafted a petition, just a few sentences, but each word cut like truth. This is about more than Juno. It's about every K9 hero discarded after service. We ask for permanent protection, transparency, and rights for retired police dogs. No more. 7 aired a segment calling it "The Petition That's Healing a Nation." Within 48 hours, the Valor's Echo Act crossed 1 million signatures. At the end of the week, it was trending worldwide. Hashtags flooded the internet. Hashtag "Let Hero Dogs Live." Hashtag "Valor Deserves Better." Hashtag "Justice for Juno." Hashtag "Echo Act Now." The White House press secretary was asked about it during a live briefing. She smiled politely. The president is aware of the movement. He's seen the footage. And yes, he's moved. In a small town called Fairpine, a printer began spitting out names, hundreds per hour, until the clinic walls were lined with rolls of paper covered in the handwriting of strangers. Teachers from Ohio, a 9-year-old boy from New Zealand, a 78-year-old Vietnam veteran who wrote, "I knew a dog like him. We buried ours in silence. No more." Back at the clinic, Juno was resting easier. His appetite was returning. He could now stand, unsteady, slow, but upright. Amélie walked beside him each time, a red scarf always within his reach, like a tether to something pure. Everywhere he moved, the room moved too, gently, quietly, with respect, as if everyone had realized they weren't just treating a dog. They were witnessing the rise of something that couldn't be caged anymore. On the 5th night after the petition launched, Robert sat with Grace reviewing signatures. He pointed to one and exhaled slowly. Senator Langford, Defense Committee. He pointed to another. Chief Dawson. That's Juno's old precinct. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Grace said, "Maybe it's finally louder than the silence they tried to bury him with." Robert nodded. Maybe. But his eyes didn't leave the screen, because he knew what momentum looked like, and he knew what frightened power more than anything else. People paying attention. Later that night, Amélie returned to the kitchen and taped her crayon drawing above the window. The hearts were still there, faded but whole. She looked at Juno, asleep now, tail twitching softly. Then she whispered to herself, "They can't take him, not when the whole world's watching." And for the first time since that smoke-filled afternoon, when she shattered the window with her tiny hands, Amélie felt something deep in her chest. Not just hope, conviction. It happened on a Wednesday, not a day for headlines, just the quiet kind. Sky pale and gray, air thick with thawing snow. A breeze moved through Fairpine and into the little veterinary clinic, bearing a handmade banner, "Home of the Hero." Inside, everything was, "Let's show them." At the hallway's end, Robert lifted a camera. Not for likes or headlines, but record, truth. For moments, the world tried to erase. Beside him, Evan adjusted the lights. Amélie stood barefoot on the tile, one slipper missing, clutching the red scarf she had once pulled from the fire, now tied across her shoulder like a sash. "So he remembers who stayed," she'd said. Grace lifted Juno gently into the sling. His muscles trembled, one step, then another, shaky but standing. Amélie didn't speak, just began walking beside him, foot for foot, the scarf trailing behind her like a thread of flame. The camera rolled. Juno's claws clicked unevenly across the tile, echoing like memory. The hallway filled with staff, one vet tech holding a tissue, another with his hand over his heart. "You're seeing it, right?" Evan whispered. Robert nodded. A resurrection. As they neared the reception desk, Juno paused, looked up at Amélie, then lowered his head, pressing gently into her hip, his ear brushing the red fabric. She placed her palm on his head. No words, just touch, a quiet blessing. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and thin, like confetti in slow motion. The door opened, not for effect, just because the world should see. And for a single moment, Juno walked forward on his own. No sling, no aid. His gait was uneven, but it was his. Robert's hands trembled behind the lens. This was the moment that would go viral, not for captions, but because of what it said without saying anything. Healing isn't linear. Survival isn't enough. Some dogs don't just walk again. They walk back. Back into memory. Back into history. Back into the place they were nearly erased from. That evening, after posting the clip, Robert sat beside Juno's cot, watching the numbers climb. The comments came in every language. A school in Belgium renamed its reading room Juno's Corner. But the view that mattered most, Amélie curled beside Juno on the couch, her scarf now his blanket, her hand resting on his paw, and for the first time since that burning vehicle had nearly claimed him, he twitched, not in pain, but from a dream. There were no reporters at the lake, no drones, no hashtags, just Amélie in a too big parka, snow boots a size too small, and Juno, still limping, but standing. Crystal Lake had frozen weeks ago, the world blanketed in silence. They walked slowly, Amélie watching for ice, Juno moving carefully, acknowledging. "I was yours the moment you didn't look away." They sat for a long time. Amélie crossed her legs. Juno curled beside her. They didn't speak. They just watched the lake. She pulled out 2 sugar cookies. "Mom says you're not supposed to have sweets," she whispered. "But you saved me. So—" He took it softly, the way only a dog who's known loss can. Amélie looked to him. "Do you think they'll come back?" He didn't answer, but his ears twitched. Sometimes that's all a child needs, not certainty, just something that listens. Sunlight broke through the clouds. The scarf glowed like fire against his fur. She brushed the knot. "I promise they won't take you again." No bravado, just clarity. Still like the lake. Evan returned to the dock at sunset. "You ready, kiddo?" Amélie didn't look up. She reached for Juno and whispered, "Let's go home." And the old soldiers stood. They walked back slowly, shadows long across the snow. A girl, a dog. Not just any girl, not just any dog. A promise had been made, and the world had been quiet enough to hear it. It started as a 27-second clip. No music, no narration, just the sound of wind, paws on snow, and dockboards creaking beneath a red-scarf dog and a silent girl. By morning, 100,000 views. By nightfall, 5 million. By week's end, 80 million. People watched it in kitchens, in clinics, in courtrooms. They watched because it felt like a prayer they hadn't known they needed. It didn't go viral from algorithm. It spread because it spoke to the soul. In Toronto, a news anchor cried live on air. In Nevada, a retired Marine tattooed Juno above his scar. In Osaka, children painted a mural, a dog, a scarf, a sky of stars. In Belgium, a sick child whispered to his mother, "That's the dog who didn't give up." They weren't watching a recovery. They were watching redemption. Grace stopped doing interviews. She didn't need to explain. The footage did that. Robert, once just a teacher, published 3 op-eds. One line echoed loudest. Juno was left to die, and instead, he rose. The department issued nothing, no apology, no statement, but it no longer mattered. The story no longer belonged to them. They were just footnotes now. The internet named what silence refused to. Hashtag Juno is home. Hashtag the red scarf promise. Hashtag K47 lives. And more than hashtags, it triggered action. Veterinary schools rewrote protocols. Rescue groups launched new coalitions. A foundation was born. Night, notebook in hand. Writing stories. Real ones. Made-up ones. All starring him. Before bed, she always whispered, "I see you. I still see you." The world stopped waiting for justice. They started becoming it. Volunteers hand-delivered blankets. Firehouses raised money to build canine ambulances. Retired handlers issued a call for reform in the name of the one who should have died in silence, but didn't. And across cities, the same phrase echoed. The world didn't save Juno. A girl did. We just followed her. Because that's how it started. With a red scarf. A child who heard something others didn't. Glass breaking, blood in snow. A hand reaching into fire. Because her heart knew something still lived. The world had watched, but she had seen. And sometimes that's the difference between surviving and being saved. The night was still. Not the uneasy kind. The kind that settles over a home like a warm blanket. Outside, snow clung to rooftops, muffling the world in silence. Inside, a soft lamp glowed in a room at the end of the hall, casting amber light over drawings taped to the wall, and a child curled under a starry quilt. Amélie lay on her side, one hand beneath her cheek, the other resting gently on the neck of the German shepherd beside her. Juno. His breathing had slowed after midnight, not from pain or fear, but peace. Earlier, Amélie had read her favorite story to him, not aloud, just that soft whisper she used when words didn't need volume to be heard. It was the one she'd written, about a brave dog who followed a red scarf through snow to rescue a child. She'd placed Pancake, her old stuffed bear, between his paws and whispered, "Keep him safe." Juno had moved just enough to curl his paw over the bear. "Good boy," she whispered, and fell asleep against his chest, rising and falling slowly with his breath. In the hours before dawn, the air changed. Juno's chest no longer rose. No sound, no cry, only stillness. The kind of stillness that feels full, not empty. A mission fulfilled, a life well carried. Amélie stirred first. She didn't wake because of sound or cold. She woke because of absence, a kind of shift Only hearts understand. She touched his fur. Still warm, but no breath. No rise. No fall. Just peace. She didn't cry at first. She just sat up. New. Children taped hearts and drawings to the windows of Grace's clinic. A red mitten, tied with ribbon, hung from the door. Inside, Amelie sat on the floor beside the empty bed, holding pancake. She wasn't crying. She just waited, as if Juno might return. No one rushed her. Robert moved slowly, like carrying glass. The town waited, for words, for permission to grieve. It was Evan who said it first. He passed during the night, and that was enough. By noon, candles appeared. No flyers, no online posts, just whispers passed from hand to hand. Crystal Lake, 6 p.m., where it all began. By sunset, the world turned winter blue. They came quietly, in twos and threes. Veterans, teachers, children, strangers. No signs, no speeches, just candles. Grace arrived with a lantern. Robert with Amelie wrapped in her red scarf, Juno's scarf now, ends trailing like memory threads. At the lake's edge they stood in a circle. Grace placed a photo of Juno in the snow, name handwritten beneath it. Then, silence. One man saluted. No one cried. Not yet. Not while the candles burned. Until the wind stirred. A boy sniffled, then sobbed. And then, from the woods, a howl. Wild, fierce, broken. No one knew if it was dog or wolf, but it echoed like a soul saying goodbye. Amelie turned toward the sound. He heard it, she whispered. Robert knelt, and for the first time in years, cried. They stayed long after numbness set in. Some knelt, some stood. Scarves, dog tags, biscuits, drawings, all left in the snow. When Grace finally spoke, it was to the wind. You were never just a dog. That night, footage of the vigil spread, not viral, but it stayed, long after the news cycle, because shared grief becomes legacy. And across the lake, a howl rose again, not sorrow, remembrance. Washington didn't hear the roar, it heard the whisper. A whisper carried through snowy silence, through a girl holding a candle and the memory of a friend who never left her side. It reached Capitol Hill 2 months later. Inside the chamber something rare happened. No arguments, no cameras, just quiet resolve. Valor's Echo Act. Section 1. Mandatory funding for retired canine care. Section 2. Transparency of discharge records. Section 3. Lifelong medical and housing support. One by one, the votes passed. Unanimously, not for politics, but because, for once, they remembered the debt owed. Your voice moved a nation. May you always carry the fire of compassion and courage. Senator Hollingsworth. Folded inside, the signed copy of the bill. At the bottom, wish you were my dog. I won't forget. Among them, someone placed a laminated printout of the now famous photo, Amelie, sitting beside Juno's recovery cot, his paw resting in her red-scarved lap. Above them, the vital monitor blinked faintly, like a starlight. That image had gone around the world, but here beside the sculpture, it became sacred. Grace stood just outside the crowd, hands in her coat pockets, shoulders stiff with memory. Robert was next to her, holding Amelie close, though she no longer needed it the way she once did. She wasn't the fragile girl who found a dog bleeding beneath a collapsed car door. She wasn't even the girl who whispered courage into his ear while cameras rolled. She was something else now, solid, quiet, unshakable, as if a piece of Juno's soul had grafted itself into hers. When she stepped forward to lay her own scarf, his scarf, across the bronze version of his back, the crowd parted with reverence. Some bowed their heads, some placed hands over hearts. She didn't say a word, but when her hand touched the cold metal shoulder of the statue, her eyes closed, and in the silence, people could almost hear it, the sound of tail against floor, the low huff of a dog who knows he's home, the quiet assurance of a promise kept. Later, a plaque was read aloud by the town mayor, her voice shaky despite the practice. In honor of K-47, Juno, he was trained to obey, but he chose to protect. He was ordered to disappear, but he chose to be seen. He saved the forgotten, guarded the innocent, and reminded the world what loyalty costs and what it gives back. At the bottom, etched into the stone, we remember. No fanfare, just the wind brushing softly through the pines, like a sigh too old to name. They said tourists would visit, that veterans would come quietly with their stories and their ghosts, and they did. But something else happened too. Children began bringing their dogs to the statue, sitting beside it as if waiting for something to rise out of the bronze. Some left drawings tucked in the paws, others tied little ribbons on the tail, and one boy, maybe 6, left a note that simply read, "I'm gonna be like him." At dusk, the light struck the sculpture just right. Juno's eyes, though cast in dull metal, seemed to hold a glint of recognition. And Amelie, now sitting on the bench nearby, whispered the words she hadn't said since that night he passed. "Still watching me, huh?" She smiled softly, scarf tugged close against the wind. "Her does a puppet that advice, or no one will listen, but..." A handler from Nebraska wrote about his partner, Chase, left at a kill shelter after a funding cut. A retired Marine sent photos of a dog named Axel, who hadn't barked in 2 years since being recalled and sedated during transport. Then there was an anonymous whistleblower from Colorado. They called it reintegration protocol, but we knew what it was: sedation, silence, disposal. We were told it was classified, but these dogs weren't data. They were family. Grace read each message like a wound reopening, one stitch at a time. And with every word, Juno's legacy grew, not in marble or metal, but in fire. By February, a task force had formed. They met in town halls, in Zoom calls, in borrowed classrooms and coffee shops. Retired handlers, veterinarians, reporters, ethicists, trauma counselors, and people like Robert, ordinary citizens who'd once trusted the system, and now asked harder questions. Together, they drafted what would become the Juno Standards. Not legislation, not bureaucracy, but something harder to ignore. A moral baseline, mandatory retirement plans, psychological evaluation for handlers and dogs, full public tracking of decommissioned canines, and, above all else, a single unwavering clause: no hero dies in silence. When the 1st Department voluntarily adopted the Juno Standards, Fort Wainwright, Alaska, it made local news. By the 10th Department, San Diego, it made national headlines. By the 30th, the phrase canine ethics reform was trending across platforms, spurred on by the hashtag Justice for Juno campaign and a new wave of civilian advocacy. But change didn't just trickle down. It rippled out. One morning in April, a retired Border Patrol dog named Sasha arrived in Fairpine. She limped, one eye clouded with scar tissue, her coat thin from anxiety chewing, but her gaze was alert, watchful. Behind her, a woman from Texas held a leash with hands that had clearly done this before. "She doesn't let anyone touch her paws," she warned. But when Amelie stepped forward, soft scarf around her neck, voice low, Sasha didn't flinch. She sat and gave her paw, as if saying, "I know, I remember too." That day marked the unofficial opening of Echo Ridge. It wasn't fancy, just an old boarding facility on the edge of the Pine Line, renovated with volunteer hours, repurposed lumber, and more donated blankets than anyone knew what to do with. But it was sacred ground. The front sign was hand-carved cedar, Echo Ridge Sanctuary, for those who served and waited. Grace ran it like a surgeon runs. Video started GoFundMes for dog beds. A retired sculptor in Maine sent handmade medals for each new arrival, engraved with a single word: stayed. Because they did. They stayed through war zones, hurricanes, fire scenes, school shootings, and now, finally, someone stayed for them. At a press event months later, Grace stood outside Echo Ridge beside a banner that simply read, "One dog changed everything." She didn't prepare a speech. She didn't need to. Instead, she gestured behind her to the open gates, where 6 dogs played in the soft grass. Among them, Sasha napped in a sunbeam. Another, named Rook, was learning to trust the sound of a gentle whistle again. "This isn't about Juno," Grace said quietly into the mic. "It's about what we owe all of them. Juno just reminded us." Somewhere out there, laws were still being debated, but in Fairpine, things had already changed. Mail arrived daily, handwritten letters from 4th-grade classrooms, thank-you notes from old handlers, sketches from strangers who'd never touched a canine but had cried when one died. And sometimes, in the deepest hours of night, Grace would walk the grounds and listen to the soft breathing from each kennel. She never said it aloud, but she felt it. He's still here. In the twitch of a sleeping paw, in the click of claws on tile, in the echo of change. The classroom was quiet, too quiet for a Friday morning. A faint ticking came from the old wall clock above the chalkboard. Somewhere outside, a crow called once, and then fell silent. Inside room 3B of Fairpine Elementary, 24 pairs of eyes stared forward, not at the teacher, but at the little girl standing beside the smartboard, her hands clasped in front of her. Amelie McAllister, now 8 years old, cleared her throat softly. The red scarf was still wrapped around her neck, not new, not clean, but exactly as it had been that winter morning so long ago. Its edges were a little more frayed now, the fabric softer from wear, but it still held its color, still held its weight, like it remembered. "My story is called The Dog Who Wouldn't Give Up on Us," she began. No one whispered, no one shuffled. Even the boy who usually fidgeted with his shoelaces sat still. She didn't need notes. Amelie told the story not from paper, but from memory, from the place in her chest where warmth and ache lived side by side. She told them about the blizzard and the snowplow and the night the clinic lights stayed on, even when the town lost power. She told them about Grace and the midnight break-in, about the reporters and the posters and the letters from people Juno had saved. But she didn't cry, not when she described the red line on the monitor going flat. Everything, his eyes, his paw, the way he waited even when no one came. She looked at her classmates then, not shy, but solemn. Some dogs are just born knowing how to love without asking anything back. Juno was like that. He didn't save just me. He saved something in us." A small silence followed. Then one of the girls in the back, Lena Brooks, raised her hand and said, "Is that why your scarf's always red?" Amelie nodded once. "He gave it back to me," she said, "when he was ready to go." After the applause, soft and respectful, Mrs. Greer thanked her and asked the class to take out their notebooks. But Amelie didn't sit down right away. Instead, she walked to the window. Outside, late spring had painted the field in shades of green and gold. The same tree line where the reporters once parked their vans now stood peacefully, untouched. A faint breeze carried dandelion fluff across the playground like drifting snowflakes. She stared out for a moment, scarf shifting slightly at her shoulder. Then she smiled. At recess, no one teased her like they used to. Not anymore. 2 boys from another class even asked if she'd sign their notebooks. Amelie giggled, shook her head, and said, "I'm not famous." But later that night, Grace would quietly add a framed drawing to the wall in the main hallway of Echo Ridge. A child's crayon rendering of a dog and a girl beneath falling snow. In the sky above them were 7 small stars, and written in block letters beneath, "The red scarf lives on."